If you live near a pond or a lake or something like that, especially right around now in mid-May, some of the most darling and cute images you might see now and then crossing the street will be a duck, a mama duck, leading her little ducklings across the street. And everybody usually slows down and watches and says, oh, look at that, how cute. But I think it's a beautiful image of the church. The church has always been considered one of the images is female. Mother Church, and staying close to her, following her. But where the analogy breaks down is when you see a little mama duck taking little ducklings across the street, you might think, where's the dad? Well, thanks to Google, duck.com, you find out real quick that male ducks don't stick around. They move off. They do whatever. They go find other families. That's why the Lord uses many images for the church. Today, he used another one, and we could almost say his own hand. He says, my sheep know me and they follow me, and they can never be taken out of my hand. And I always envision like his two hands making the shape of a boat where we're all inside the bark of Peter. That's why for centuries, when they built churches like this one, they tried their best to make the ceiling look like the bottom of a boat, a ship that we stay on in troubled waters. But also, today is called Good Shepherd Sunday. And so we're reminded of shepherds, that Jesus formed men, like last week, we talked about the ministry of Peter, not just to follow him like a little duckling to a duck, but he made them into shepherds, soldiers, to go out and protect the church. As shepherds, they all knew what that was. That was a guy out in the field with a stick. And in 1st or 2nd Timothy, I think it's 2nd Timothy, Paul gives Timothy a nice little job description of what a shepherd's supposed to do. He says, you're the shepherd. And what are they supposed to do? Well, they're supposed to protect, primarily, from wolves. Admonish, encourage, teach, and ultimately equip. That they don't stay as little weak shepherds, or little sheep, and little weak ducklings. They're called to be shepherds. But that's an encouragement and a reminder to all of us as Catholics that we have a visible entity called the church with a visible head, a visible ship that we're asked to stay in, stay close to, protect. And that is, we enter that boat, that ship, that mother church by baptism. By baptism, we're now in his hands. And as we hear today, he says, nothing can plunk them out of it. Nothing can plunk you out of the church. But I think it's a good time to remind us what we believe about salvation. Staying close to the church, staying in the church means nothing can plunk you out. It doesn't mean you can't walk away. It doesn't mean you can't dive off the end. We have many examples of men who did. Peter jumped out a couple of times, where Jesus had to help him back in the boat. And when he denied Jesus, he took a headlong dive outside the ship. And that process of getting back on it was penance. But he did. And Judas jumped off the ship and disappeared in the water. Because the evil one knows that he can't pluck us out of the church. He can only tempt us out. He's allowed to do that. He's allowed to do that. Evil spirits do that. They tempt us out because they know they can't grab us and pull us out. The opposite can be kind of used as an image too of a fish. A fish belongs in the water. That's where it thrives, where it lives. I don't fish. I'm not a fisherman. but we used to live in a town that had a river that had fish, and I would try to grab them with my hands. It didn't go well. It didn't go well. And if you've ever been fishing with people who know what they're doing, they know the only way to get them fish out of there is you got to lure them. Isn't that what's called a lure? I've heard that. It's called a lure. You got to bait them. And put a fancy, shiny bait on a hook. I was on a lake with some friends, and one of them pulled out a big, huge fish. And he's like, look what I got. And I remember looking at that fish's eyes, and his eyes just screamed to me, I can't believe I did that. I can't believe I let that happen. I can't believe I fell for that. The saddest part is when he gloriously threw it at the bottom of the ship and it's like flopping all over the place. Why? Because it was not where it was meant to be. And he can only blame himself. Why? Because he took the bait. He took the bait. As a church, we remember that our guarantee, our relationship with God depends on the church. You might ask your friends or even your fellow Catholics maybe fallen away. You might ask them, what's your relationship like with God? And they may say something like, oh, it's good. God and I were good. I just feel it. I just feel it. Well, my friends, faith is not a feeling. Your relationship with God is not a feeling. It's not an emotion. It's a decision. You might even say, I hear this all the time, well, God knows my heart. God knows your heart. He does. You don't. I don't. You actually, if you're something wrong with your heart, you generally have to go to a doctor, and he lets you know there's something wrong with your heart. Well, we approach the church. We approach the church. And like we said last week, that we look back on all of Judeo-Christian history, the people of God were always connected to something or someone. And that's how they checked their relationship with the church. The Israelites, what was their relationship with Moses? That's their relationship with God. With Abraham, with Elijah especially, and with David, they were heads of the kingdom, shepherds. Doing what? Protecting the church, protecting the people, representing them, being a father to them. And so as Catholics, we ask ourselves, we should, what's our relationship with God? Well, we better check with the church. Have we been to confession? Have we been to the sacraments? Are we married in the church? We're reconciled to one another. Have we kept the holy days? Have we kept the precepts of the church? That's objective, not subjective, because we tend to give ourselves a pass until we check with the church. Now, there are churches that have gone into schism. There are all kinds of people who've jumped out of the church and started their own church and on little dinghies. Like 30,000 of them, some say. Now, am I saying that people who aren't Catholic or Protestants or someone like that are going to hell? Of course not. Of course not. Because it's not true. It's not true. But, like being in any ship, you jump off. Doesn't mean you won't make it to shore, but it's more difficult. You may build yourself your own little raft, and now there's thousands of those. Thousands of those. I don't think that's what God had in mind. I don't think that's what Jesus had in mind when he says, God, let them be one. Father, let them be one as you and I are one, so that the world may believe. The world may believe. And as Catholics, we look to shepherds and challenge them. And it is an exciting time. And today, we will pray for the Bishop of Rome, Pope Leo, and his ministry. And his ministry. So let me go ahead and address the elephant in the room. My phone has been blowing up that I look like the Pope. I will admit the Pope is very handsome. I will admit that. But also to remember that his position now as Holy Father is a cross. It is a cross. And if you've been paying attention, you know, when he got elected, they put him in this room called the Room of Tears. And what are they doing there? they mourn their past life. He no longer gets to sneak into Chicago and watch White Sox games anymore. Those days are over. He stayed in there for quite a while, actually, and mourned the loss of his past life, and then embraced his new role as the Holy Father in that Petrine ministry as a shepherd. No longer, not even a duckling, no longer a minor duckling, staying close to the church, but becoming a shepherd to do what? To protect the church, to hold it together, to hold it all together. So today I would say to most of you in here, you're no longer ducklings following the church, mother church. Not only you're supposed to stay close to her, stay in the church, but especially bishops, priests, deacons, husbands, fathers, all of you who have been asked to shepherd people. You mothers today, you image the church. That all of us in some way or another are called to come out of our duckling phase and start to protect the church, protect mama, protect our mother today. Happy Mother's Day.